In a few minutes, Ardal O'Hanlon, who played Father Dougal Maguire alongside Father Ted. But first, Pauline McGlynn, known to millions as Mrs. Doyle, told me how she heard the tragic news.
Well, I got a phone call very first thing yesterday morning from Dermot's PA, just saying that there was some very, very bad news. And that was the first that we knew. And in fact, actually, I thought, it's one of those stories when you hear, I have some bad news, Dermot's had a heart attack, and I thought, he's in hospital. But, you don't expect it to be followed up with, he died. It's just incredible because he absolutely is just, was so full of life, Because I think that's the first thing that anybody would have noticed about Dermot when they met him, is that he was just full of the most incredible energy,
It was one of those mornings I wasn't up too early.
I know. Well, let me ask you, I seem to remember that Voltaire said that the satirist must hate the object of his satire. Do you think that Dermot Mogan hated the objects of his satire?
No, he didn't. He didn't hate the people, certainly, and he was always very funny, no matter how hard he hit. But I think he did hate a lot of aspects of Irish life and a lot of aspects of politics. He hated hypocrisy. He hated double think and double talk, and I didn't know him at the start, but I remember he was on the Late one night and he was slagging me off, and I rang in and slagged him back, and following day I got a phone call from him. He was coming to Limerick, and I met him, and I met him frequently after that. And he used to vary a lot. It's like Father Paul said there. He'd meet you first full of exuberance, full of excitement, full of jokes, cracks, take-offs of other people, and then it would go down into serious conversations and back up again, and then he'd usually tell you of his plans. He always had, 5 or 6 new ideas for great shows in his head, and he'd go through those.
Would you agree with Father Paul that he was vicious but unmalicious?
I don't think he was vicious. There was no aspect of viciousness in his personality, but his humour, like very good satire, was very, very biting and very, very cutting, but he always felt that there was a kind of a high purpose to it. He always felt like best satirist, that he had a role to correct the hypocrisies and foibles of society by holding them up to ridicule. And he used to discuss this too, But he was very funny then, and I remember when I was made Minister for Health, I was getting a series of phone calls congratulating me and being back in office, and he rang me from a mobile from a backseat of a taxi somewhere in London, and he pretended he was a Limerick constituent looking for a hip operation, And he was full of things like that. I remember the day I met him watching rugby in Bobby Burns in Limerick. Everybody, when we got in, was looking at the television, and they didn't know we were behind. And then at half-time, they turned around, they saw the two of us at the counter. Yeah. And of course, they were amused and bemused. But then immediately he lapsed into a takeoff of Michael Noonan. So you had this surreal conversation with two guys sitting at the counter talking in the same accents, Yeah. And the guys up the front saying, yeah, that's the way they are. You look at them now, there they are, lofting pints. That's the way the doll is. All slagging each other off, and they all drinking together into the night.
In each other's pockets.
In each other's pockets,
On the question of accent, though, as a fellow Limerick man, it's always struck me that even the most gifted people, where accents are concerned, cannot crack the Limerick accent. But he did it. How did he do it?
I suppose, you see...
Was it Jerry Stembridge?
Jerry Stembridge certainly gave him great insight. But as you know, there are a number of Limerick accents.
I know, and yours is not necessarily city, I know.
No, mine is not necessarily city, and I suppose there's a kind of a quirk in my voice, like the cuckoo. I'd be known for my bad voice, and I'm easy to take off. And I think that dictated the characters he satirised quite frequently. If you had some uniqueness in your accent, he mimicked it, and other people he couldn't take off because they had more neutral or undescriptive accents.
Mm-hmm. Was he a good thing for you in your political life rather than anything else?
Yeah, I think he was. I think if I had taken him seriously, he'd have sunk me. But because I slagged him back, we developed this kind of relationship thing. And, it was done on the media on a number of occasions. And, I had come out of the Department of Justice, which is a very serious department, And he did me a favour by lightening up the image, But I liked him very much. He was very sensitive. He was very genuine, and he was very stressed as well at times, extremely stressed even in normal social life.
You were not hurt by what he did, but some weren't they?
That's right, there's no doubt at all that at times...
And he did go over the top with some impersonal references to some people.
That's right. I mean, there was a bit that I rang him on one occasion to say he was gone too far. He took off Sheila de Valera and was very personal. I think he went over the top on that occasion.
And what did he say to you when this was...
He'd be
admit it?
He'd be upset, that you'd be criticising him, and he'd say, but it was only fun, and I didn't really put it that way. And then he'd laugh and he'd say something totally outrageous about somebody. and come back that way. I hadn't met him though since he became a real international star with Father Ted and moved to London. I haven't met him for quite a while now. It was in the Scrap Saturday days. I used to meet him frequently.
Did he regale you, as he did others, about his bitterness at being dropped by RTE?
Yeah, but again, it would never be, the totality of the conversation. There was a whole lot of mood changes if you were with him over a period of time. And yes, he was angry, and he was more frustrated, I suppose. He had great ideas always, and he'd say, look, what do you think of this? I'm thinking of doing this, and I'm going to present this to them now. But of course, I suppose they won't take any notice of me, and he had this feeling that he was very hard done by an RTE, yes.
Did you feel that?
Yeah, I think the Scrap Saturday should have been allowed to continue.
Why was it not allowed to continue, do you think?
I think that the people, who were making the decisions in RTE couldn't cope with it, and they were always afraid of a potential explosion. I don't think there was any overt political pressure put on by anybody to drop it.
You don't?
I'm not sure. It certainly wasn't put on by anybody I know anyway, but I think there was people in RTE who just could not cope with political satire, and I think they were afraid of their own careers or something.
But were they not the ones who put it on in the first place?
Yes, but they bought into something on an experimental basis, and they, from their perspective, didn't realise what they had. Mm-hmm. The volcano they had every Saturday morning until later on.
You actually, Michael Noonan, you put out a statement on the death of Dermot Mogan, which I don't know whether this is a first for a politician to put out a statement regretting the passing of a comedian. Were you too close, perhaps?
No, I don't think so. I was thinking about it last night, how many times did I meet him? I suppose I met him 15 times socially, and I haven't met him in recent years, since he became the big international star. But he used to listen very carefully when I'd be with him, and you could see that he was trying to, nuance the accent a little better.
I know he tried it with me too, but yeah. I greatly fear he never quite managed it.
I think
Did he?
Me or you, David?
Me. Oh, he got you all right.
Yeah, he got you partly, but you're a more sophisticated Limerick person, so it's more difficult to get you that accurately,
All right. Well, we'll end up laughing at that, as he perhaps would have wished. Michael Noonan, thank you for coming into our Limerick studios.
Thank you very much, David.
And he knew one day he'd make it, and he sure did.
Mike Murphy, thank you very much for joining us.
We're joined now on the phone by Frank Kelly, one of Dermot Morgan's co-stars in the Father Ted series. Frank, all those who work on the programme must be very shocked this morning.
We are quite shattered. You couldn't begin to believe it. I came home this morning from Mass, and my son met me, and I said, I have very bad news for you, and he told me that Dermot had died, and I can tell you I'm still traumatised, quite shattered.
And have you seen him in recent days?
Well, I was taping a programme with him on Friday night. I'm just back from London. And he was tired, and it's a fairly heavy workload, and pretty stressed, I think. But who's going to predict that something horrible like this is going to happen,
But he must have been in good form looking forward to the third series of Father Ted.
He was, and the funny thing about Dermot always appeared to have a very short attention span, and the reason for that was his mind was mercurial. I mean, the ideas were churning out at high speed, and it wasn't that he wasn't really being inattentive to you. He just settled on another thing, do you know what I mean, another possible comedic subject. But we had a few very pleasant, much more relaxed conversations during the last series, and we were reminiscing about a number of things. But I remember one day he said, this year it's make it or bust. And I said, well, I mean, you've made it, And I said, anyway, I've been saying make it or bust for the last 35 years. And we just burst out laughing at the concept of ever arriving, Yeah,
because Mike Murphy was talking there a minute ago about the early years, but in terms of Father Ted was the international break, wasn't it, that he always looked for?
I think it was, yes, indeed. Yeah, it was. And he was hugely pleased with it, and it's a great credit to him that as a man who hadn't really got a kind of theatrical background, he was able to get on top of a very big role. You see, he had a huge load to carry in every show, because he didn't really get all of the laughs. He had to hand them away to other people. That's just the structure of the series. But he did that very generously, and he was extraordinarily disciplined. There was none of this kind of old-style music hall thing of stealing somebody else's, laughter. He was very, very professional, actually, about this whole thing. And I think that he was a kind of comedic meteor. He literally burnt himself out, I think.
We've been describing him as an actor and a comedian. Which word do you think he'd most appreciate to describe himself?
He'd have made a joke. He'd have found something funny to say about that. Do you know what I mean? He'd have found some irony. He'd have juxtaposed the two things, and we'd all have been laughing at a joke.
A genuinely funny man who'll sadly be missed. Frank Kelly, thank you for taking our call.
It's my pleasure. Okay, thank you.